All right, let's go ahead and do it then. Thank you all for coming today to the presentation, Fiscal Sponsorship and its Impact on Racial Equity, a Student's Perspective. Today's topic is going to be about fiscal sponsorship. Harold, if I could get you to go to the next slide for me. And the use of the ABCD model and the NSAW competencies to advance community development and specifically racial equity. Dara, who will introduce herself in a moment, will be discussing the process that we've begun to take to develop a white paper on this topic and her own perspective as an MSW candidate. She's married her student experience with her experience at her internship at Side Project and, of course, her personal life experiences as well. Also helping today are two facilitators, Harold and August, who both work at Portland State University in the Teaching, Learning, Engagement, and Assessment Department. And of course, Kim, who is at the ABCD Institute. They will be assisting us, Harold and August and Kim will be assisting us on the technological side, and we're eternally grateful for that help. So I'm going to give Dara an opportunity to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Dara Pruszenski. I'm a third-year part-time graduate student at the University of Pittsburgh School of Social Work. My concentration is in community organizing and social action. I'm due to graduate this December. The reasons behind our project is that there's an exorbitant amount of research on racial equity, which is the process of eliminating racial disparities and improving outcomes for everyone. But there is also numerous articles on fiscal sponsorship, but nothing linking fiscal sponsorship and its impact on racial equity. So that's why Arwen and I decided to start researching and begin to draft the white paper of the same name. Now I'm going to let Arwen introduce herself to the group and tell you a little bit more about Side Project.
Thanks, Dara. So I'm Arwen. I'm the Side Project COO. I've been fortunate to work alongside incredible social work interns for around 10 years, and I've worked with the ABCD model for about the same amount of time. I hold an MPA from Pitt, and I've been with Side Project for about 3 years. So at Side Project, our mission is to promote social justice and social change by incubating and developing grassroots projects. We hold our values of service, inclusion, competence, relationship, social justice, and even fun in high regard. Side Project was founded in 2012, and we offer 3 programmatic areas, including fiscal sponsorship, low and pro bono nonprofit general counsel legal services, and education and training. I'll dive into fiscal sponsorship in more detail in a few moments. But in all of our work, we follow the ABCD model. We seek to work with change agents to mobilize individuals, associations, and institutions to come together to build on their existing assets. In the chat right now, a poll will pop up and you'll find a question about your familiarity with fiscal sponsorship. If you could answer that, and in the meantime, I'm going to discuss our agenda for the day. So for today's presentation, we'll be starting with a breakout session. We're going to then go over the objectives, background, and methodology of the paper. Dara will then dive into the lessons we've learned to date, and she'll discuss her perspective of the project. We'll go over our next steps for both the paper development and for Dara, and then we'll conclude with a second breakout session and questions and answers. So to kick us off, we're going to start with a breakout session. We'd like to give you some time to introduce yourselves to the other folks in your breakout rooms. Then we'd like you to begin discussing how you've experienced social work and whether in what you've seen, social work has taken an important role in racial equity. You'll have about a minute to introduce yourselves and 6 to 7 minutes to answer the question, which we know isn't much time. It's a really broad topic, but we'd like to get your initial thoughts. On the shared slide deck, which we've put in the chat, and I'll link again right now, there will be a place for you to type in your thoughts for your room, as well as a place to put your contact information if you so choose. After the breakout, we're going to come back together and see if some of what we discuss matches what your thoughts and your experiences have been and have shown. Well, welcome back, everyone. I think most people are back with us. Thank you so much for taking the time to have what I hope were robust conversations. We're going to come back later to what your thoughts were. We hope that we'll be able to have a good conversation about what you brought up now and what our presentation entails. So for now, we're going to discuss the white paper formulation and the process that we've taken. So I'm going to hand it over to Dara.
Thanks, Arwen. Our white paper objectives are that we would like the conversation to move from a casual dialogue to a more formal discussion. We also want to establish publications about racial equity as a fiscal sponsorship tool. And we're going to highlight the possibilities of this type of relationship and also outline key steps people and organizations might take to be successful. A little bit about my background and my student experience. My social work curriculum has included a community organizing class and human behavior courses, both of which have been instrumental as a foundation for this project. Community organizing, as most of you know, is a process where people who live in proximity to each other or share some common problems come together into a movement that acts in their shared interest. Community organizing is one of the core tools to rally mass momentum for social transformation. And ABCD draws on the anticipatory language of Alinsky, who is the founder of community organizing, highlighting the social work values of social and economic justice, participation, democratic practices, social inclusion, empowerment, and capacity building. Studying human behavior, particularly in the urban environment, I was able to examine collective behavior and societal values relative to key urban issues, particularly around race, gender, and poverty. Coming from a middle-class family who was pretty sheltered growing up, I wanted to learn more. The class really made me think about my privilege and how much work we all need to do to help lift up and advocate for groups of people who've been oppressed and marginalized. Now, how am I applying ABCD as a student, both in a learning environment and in the real world applications? I'm going to talk about it with other students and faculty. I'm going to participate in workshops such as this one. I'm going to identify and name the systems that create inequity, inclusion, and division, and our role in them. I'm also going to be spotlighting those who experience systemic inequalities and encourage them to step into roles of leadership. I'll be analyzing budgets, governance structures, and strategies in an effort to make them truly democratic, participatory, and inclusive. I'm also going to be reflecting individually and collectively to understand the role of racism and bias in my own relationships and at work. Now I'll have Arwen discuss a little bit about the background of Side Project and the definition of fiscal sponsorship.
Sorry, I was muted. I'm just going to jump back in for a few moments and tell you more about Side Project and ABCD. So our founder, Jeff Fromneck, is a social worker and a nonprofit attorney. He and a group of like-minded graduate students came together to discuss this intrinsic connection between grassroots charitable activities, community organizing, and the opportunity to connect with assets in the community, like the graduate students that they were representing at the time. So from the very beginning, Side Project was strategically thinking about community organizing and nonprofits and the ABCD model. Today at Side Project, we use ABCD in two key ways. First, we use it with our fiscal sponsorship program, where we work alongside new projects to create logic models and conduct asset mapping so that they have a strong foundation for moving forward in such a way that leads to success. Second, we conduct our nonprofit general counsel legal services, and when we do so from an asset-based perspective, building on the strength of what the people who are doing the work have, and so that they can not only meet the requirements of the rules and the regulations in their jurisdictions, but do so in a way that builds them up for successfully working towards their mission. And so I know you're all eager, or at least half of you are eager to learn about fiscal sponsorship. So fiscal sponsorship is fundamentally a contractual relationship that allows charitable projects to receive tax-deductible donations and make tax-exempt purchases. There are two major requirements of fiscal sponsorship. First, the sponsoring nonprofit must maintain complete control over the funds. And second, the charitable missions must match. The sponsored project must further the sponsoring organization's mission. I do want to be clear about what fiscal sponsorship is not, and that's what's traditionally known as fiscal agency, which is pass-through dollars. There are really clear models to follow and specific conditions to meet for fiscal sponsorship to be successful. So why might a group of community organizers use fiscal sponsorship? We all know that the legal and financial process is lengthy and expensive. And as Harold said, who's one of our facilitators, said when we were having a discussion the other day, it's really not set up for grassroots social justice revolution. What fiscal sponsorship does is it allows the charitable activities to be just that, charitable, without all of that cumbersome work to get a 501c3. Groups might come to fiscal sponsorship because they're short term. They maybe don't have the back office or administrative capacity to manage their finances, or maybe they've applied for their 501c and haven't received it yet, but they're ready to get going. While those are some of the main reasons groups might seek fiscal sponsorship, there are others. However, it's important to understand that there's a give and there's a take. When you're a sponsored project, you give up your ultimate financial control over the dollars, but you also give up your risks and your liabilities. You earn the reputation of the sponsoring organization, but you also have to pay them for their services. Fiscal sponsorship is an incredible tool when it's a good fit. For now, I know you might have questions. You can put them in the chat. For now, we're going to move on to the methodology of the paper, and we're actually going to come back to fiscal sponsorship in a few moments.
Thank you, Arwen. As far as our methodologies, the first step started with informal discussions and hunches. It started with informal conversations with Arwen and my field instructor, who is also the CEO of Side Project, as Arwen has stated. Jeff Fromnecht and I started these conversations early on in the onboarding process. I was asked to research and review articles on disability justice frameworks, and this is where I initially learned about the ABCD approach. During my orientation, Jeff called it our theory and the foundation of our work at Side Project. In the months that followed, Arwen and I had more informal conversations about this idea that she's had for a while now. The idea is that there is a plethora of research on fiscal sponsorship and numerous studies on racial equity, but nothing that links them together and how one impacts the other. I can tell you that when Arwen approached me with this idea, I was very apprehensive about co-authoring this paper because I'm a white woman with no lived experience, and how can I do this paper justice in any sort of way? But as I began to have informal discussions with Arwen, who is a woman of color, and throughout this year of my internship, Arwen and I were also having informal discussions with our projects, some of which are led by people of color. I was asking questions and getting feedback on their lived experiences, and I was able to continue to reflect on my privilege, and I began to realize that I can help to raise awareness about this topic and move the narrative from a more informal conversation to a more formal one. The next step in the process was to conduct a literature review, which was started October 2021. And I looked at source areas like scholarly articles, books, and even blogs. One example that I found was in the National Institute of Health. They fund research at universities and other research institutions in the US. What I found was in August of 2011, a groundbreaking review of grants awarded over a 7-year period revealed that for independent research grants, applications from white applicants were nearly twice as likely to be funded than applications from Black applicants. A follow-up study was done in 2019, which showed that this has not changed and that applications with white applicants were still twice as likely to be funded than applications sent in by Black applicants. Another striking finding was that applicants are required on average to submit a grant application more times before it is funded, and are also less likely to revise and resubmit a previously reviewed application. So other articles to support these findings will be presented in the white paper. Next, we're in the process of conducting surveys with fiscal sponsors. Some of the questions that we will be asking are, have you had a conversation internally about racial equity and how your work moves the needle moving forward? Have you implemented any changes in your policies and protocols to ensure accessibility and adaptation to the unique needs? And has your board of directors made any statements and backed institutional changes to ensure racial equity? Then we'll be doing case study interviews with Rochelle Jackson, who is a Black woman and founder of one of our Pittsburgh projects called Black Women's Policy Agenda. It is a project that provides a platform that centers and amplifies on the voices of Black women across all identities. We will also be interviewing other side projects led by diverse directors, as well as reaching out to interested projects at other fiscal sponsors. Then we will draft the paper, which is in process. We started in January of 2022, drafting the background and what we can do before, like the surveys and the interviews. Last in our methods is releasing and publishing the paper, which will be complete by the time I'm done with my placement at Side Project in August. Next, I'll talk to you about the lessons that I've learned during this process. First are the opportunities for improvement. The data. The stats are not there. Looking at the Pittsburgh area, I could only find information on the number of nonprofit organizations, which are around 18,000 in the greater Pittsburgh metro area. But there's no real stats on how many are BIPOC-led. Future research should take a closer look at the specific statistics of nonprofit organizations based on race and locality. It might draw more attention to recognizing and addressing the structural barriers that often prevent people of color from reaching the top of the nonprofit sector. Also, the published research is not all in one place. I had to go to several different source locations. Also, the nonprofit sector is siloed. Organizations are made up of different people with different views. Nearly every program, every organization, and every position impacts others in a meaningful way, that it's critical for an organization's success. So it's important to set up expectations at the very beginning. Each organization needs to know what the other is up to. Knowledge is key. This helps each organization and all the people in that organization understand the challenges, celebrations, and visions of that organization. Next are some of our successes. Communicating in a team. Both Arwen and I have very different learning styles, and no one style is the right way. We just need to look at each other's strengths and assets and use the ABCD approach and bring them together. Through this experience, we both have been able to build connections and networks. And also there's excitement about this topic. People agree that this is an issue, that this is a possible solution, and that people are talking about it, but just not writing about it. Next, I'm going to talk about how fiscal sponsorship can improve racial equity. There's some key foundations upon which equitable practices might be built according to Squire 2020. And those are having clear definitions of resources being shared and how they are shared. Also fostering social connectedness, intentional community, and ongoing learning. Also need to have a bottom-up shared governance and authority over resources held in common. The next area will be paths of implementation and emerging practices according to Squire and TSNE Mission Works. They'll look at accessibility and flexibility, empathy, sympathy, and affordance, listening and responsive communication, implicit bias awareness, and disconcernment. The first I'll talk about is accessibility and flexibility. Fiscal sponsors need to utilize accessibility and flexibility to eliminate or reduce barriers related to cost, lack of knowledge, negative emotional states, over expenditure of time, such as requiring lengthy applications, burdensome management processes, etc. It's important to ensure all grassroots organizations have access to resources by using flexible criteria to determine risk, a multi-step risk assessment during the application process, and organizational health assessments to continuously review and understand projects' evolving work. Grassroots groups, especially those with BIPOC leadership, may not always have the legal, financial, and human resources knowledge associated with running a nonprofit organization. Therefore, through building trusting relationships with organizations, like holding frequent meetings, engaging in mutual learning, and keeping lines of communication open, fiscal sponsorship organizations can mitigate the risk before it happens. Next up is empathy, sympathy, and affordance. Not only engaging in active understanding and compassion for project leaders and staff, including trauma-informed practices, but also thinking about the affordances, how the environment might empowers our projects. Provide a range of integrated administrative, fiscal sponsorship, and capacity building services to ensure grassroots organizations have access to culturally aligned and customized supports. Fiscal sponsors should explore offering a range and combination of customized services to support the diverse needs of their grassroots groups, especially those led by people of color. Fiscal sponsors should also explore understanding and potentially meeting capacity building needs, such as a fund development or leadership development as a means to ensure nonprofit movements, coalitions, and organizations and groups have access to resources and supports that attend to their unique needs. Next is listening and responsive communication. Engaging in appreciative listening, dialogue, and active learning about the resources and systems that are being shared build the organizational cultures that center on relationship building, mutual learning, and open and frequent dialogue as a means to provide services that culturally align with the values and goals of BIPOC-led grassroots organizations. Fiscal sponsors often lack an understanding of how BIPOC-led organizations define leadership, capacity building, and effectiveness, which leads to cultural mistrust. By working directly side by side with grassroots organizations rather than having the expectations or assumptions of what they need to do, and by engaging in deep listening and open dialogue, fiscal sponsors can learn about the values and goals of BIPOC-led organizations and mitigate the mistrust and cultural misalignments. Next is implicit bias awareness. You need to build awareness for and the processes to challenge implicit bias in its many and ever-changing forms. In particular, considering the aspects of traditional management practices, fiscal sponsors need to use cross-functional service delivery models as a means to ensure that the grassroots organizations have access to holistic, customized, and integrated capacity building and fiscal sponsorship services. To best serve grassroots organizations, fiscal sponsors should consider using an integrated cross-functional team of staff, with one staff member serving as a project manager for each organization. In addition to implementing a cross-functional team of staff, consider building a one-fee structure into this cross-functional model. This service delivery model allows fiscal sponsors to streamline the services and communication and sustainably scale the services if needed. Finally, by integrating fiscal sponsorship services with capacity building into a one-fee structure, fiscal sponsors can determine the true cost of their services and ensure fiscal sponsors can sustainably support their work and the work of grassroots groups. Lastly, is eliminating disconcernment or that anxious embarrassment. Fiscal sponsors need to have delicate process of remaining open to new people and ideas entering our community while avoiding pre-conventional or predefined assessment criteria, such as received concepts of excellence and impact. We need to develop and take advantage of external partnerships to complement and supplement the current service offerings of grassroots organizations. Fiscal sponsors may not have all the resources and expertise to respond to the unique needs of under-resourced movements, coalitions, organizations, and groups supporting marginalized communities. Fiscal sponsors should develop new or leverage existing external partnerships with community-based organizations and local townships to fill gaps in their services. As a result, they strengthen their offerings and provide a range of resources, services, and industry connections. Next, I'll talk about my perspective as a student. As I explained earlier, I initially felt torn about being a part of this process because I'm a white woman without lived racial experience. But as I began to go deeper into my studies, researching literature for this paper, and interacting with projects this past year, I realized that I can contribute to this narrative by working within and alongside the conversation happening. I initially felt uncomfortable, but getting comfortable with discomfort of talking about race is a critical first step to driving a more equitable society. It is of the utmost importance to focus on the strengths of individuals, groups, and associations and continue to have these discussions around ABCD approach with my fellow peers and with people in the community. Having that foundation of social work courses during my time at the University of Pittsburgh allowed me to gain that professional platform to engage in my inner helper, to allow me to help people from all walks of life. I've always been interested in what motivates people, and I know that people's lives change when they're empowered, and I find the work of helping them rewarding. I went through some challenging periods of time growing up, as many people do. Many social workers enter the profession after personally experiencing some adversity. Some survive difficult circumstances and now want to help people in similar situations. This is where I found myself. I've enjoyed my classes and enjoyed my time with Side Project as an intern. I've engaged with some amazing projects. One project I was particularly fond of is Heart of a Warrior, who was founded by an Afro-Latinx man, Pless Jones, who is also on the workshop right now. So hi, Pless. The project's mission is to celebrate the last day of chemo with patients by making them feel like a rock star with a limousine ride in the city, going to all of their favorite places. Arwen and I assisted him from the very beginning when it was just this thought in his head. We were able to meet with him to map out his mission and vision and help him work through his logic model to identify his resources, strengths, and assets, modeling ABCD to transfer his idea to paper. We've had frequent meetings and regular follow-up meetings to go over his logic model, as well as go line by line through his budget. We were working directly side by side with him rather than having expectations or assumptions of what he needs to do. And by engaging in deep listening and open dialogue, building that trusting relationship with him and engaging in mutual learning. Arwen and I also helped him develop leverage with our existing external partnerships we have with Carnegie Mellon to assist Pless with some fundraising strategies, which he's currently working on. It's been really rewarding to see him empowered to create this project for the community. So thank you, Pless, for letting me share this story today. That is why it is so important to have these conversations about race and the history of systemic racism and get ourselves educated in complex relations of culture, power, systems of oppression, and moving to find ways to promote social justice through the ABCD approach and incorporating it into strategies like fiscal sponsorship. The buy-in is the word of mouth, and having those uncomfortable conversations will hopefully lead to a more formal conversations that will lead to finding new ways to increase racial equity. So now I'll be taking some time to talk about our next steps. The next steps will be, and as you can see, though, there's a poll discussing how much you are applying this approach in your everyday work. So as far as next steps, we're talking about methodology that we still have yet to take. We'll be completing surveys and analyzing the data. We'll be finishing the final draft of the paper, releasing and publishing. Now, my plans for the rest of the semester will be to see the paper through to the publishing stage and continue to meet with our new and current projects to assess their strengths, continuing to utilize the logic model and asset mapping. How will I continue to implement ABCD in my social work life after graduation? I'll take what I've learned from my classes, workshops like this one, and my internship at Side Project and carry them over that information into my current role that I just started as a special projects coordinator for a large nonprofit. As a special projects coordinator in strategic planning and corporate services, my position goes across all departments within the organization. I can play a key role in creating change to help to normalize the conversation on racial equity by achieving a shared understanding of key concepts among the board and staff. A racial equity framework sees racism as both individual and institutional, both explicit and implicit, and everyone needs to share these understandings. Once everyone is on the same page, the organization can treat the issue as top priority by setting goals, making a plan, and holding itself accountable. Bringing about change also requires organization. Internally, nonprofits need the infrastructure to build expertise on racial equity within the organization. This might mean training existing staff, hiring additional staff, or working with a consultant, which I can assist the Human Resources Department by providing resources on both racial equity and the ABCD approach. Externally, my organization can work with others who are seeking change from different but related perspectives to have a greater impact in the community. Finally, implementing change means having the tools and information to make change and track progress. Internal and external assessments, activities, and guidelines will help my organization follow tried and tested practices in implementing strategy. Data plays an important role as well, allowing organizations to create a baseline, set goals, and track progress towards those goals. I work closely with the data and informatics individuals at my organization who may be able to help track our progress. In my day-to-day work setting and in my everyday life, I'll take away from this valuing the strengths and assets of others. I'll ask better questions rather than what's wrong, but I'll ask where is the organization strong? Have those discovery sessions. Find and name people's gifts, help people share their gifts, and also use celebration as a capacity building tool.
Sorry, I was muted again. Thanks, Dara. I'm sure our minds are going strong, but we'd like to take this opportunity to give you a few moments to go back into the breakout rooms and do a little synthesizing. We'd like to hear your thoughts, what your thoughts are about fiscal sponsorship coming together with ABCD as a tool for racial equity. Looks like over half of you are implementing this sometimes. And so we'd like to hear how you feel this applies to the personal work and how you've been doing that in your personal work. So we're going to go ahead and get you into your breakout rooms. There are sticky notes. The yellow ones are highlighting the second question. And if you'd like to type in notes about what you're discussing, that's super helpful. And there's also an opportunity at the top of the shared slide deck, which will give you the chance to give your contact information if you want us to send you the paper when it's published. We're not going to reach out for other reasons. That's just for us to get the paper to you. Okay, so let's get you split out. Just going to give everybody a chance to come back in. Okay, looks like we've got most folks. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with each other. We were following along with some of your notes, and we saw that there's a question on at least one in at least one group. So we'd like to take this opportunity to invite you to ask questions and to tell us your thoughts about what's been presented today and what you've discussed in the breakout rooms. So I'm going to just open it up right now to let folks ask questions if they want. I know our facilitators have a couple of questions, so let's maybe start there while other folks are formulating their questions. Harold or August?
Sure. I was curious because the series is focused on asset-based community development and higher education. If y'all could talk about examples of colleges, universities who are serving as fiscal sponsors or something similar to that.
Yeah, I think it's not uncommon. I know of a few circumstances in and around the Pittsburgh area where a lot of our fiscal sponsored projects are located. Point Park University does fiscal sponsorship. Especially in the scientific community, it happens on a formal and informal basis where they'll adopt a project and be that sort of financial control for the project. So it definitely happens. There are complications when it is a university, a college or a university. You don't get a lot of those advantages that you get with a smaller fiscal sponsor because of the red tape associated with moving finances through a university type institution. So when we talk about racial equity and some of the things that we want to put into place to help move racial equity forward with fiscal sponsorship, like flexibility, having less restrictions, those are not always things that are easy to find in the university setting. What other questions do we have, August?
Thank you. Yeah, I was curious about alongside racial equity, if there were moments when you maybe had to contend with white supremacy culture or with white supremacy showing up in fiscal sponsorship, and if you could speak to that.
Yeah, so that's a really great question. And we actually just at our last board meeting had a really great presentation by one of our law clerks who works for a banking institution. And she talked to us about homegrown terrorism, about white supremacist culture, and how banking institutions specifically are starting to see white supremacist groups reaching out to fiscal sponsors as a way to sort of mask the dollars that are coming to those white supremacist groups. And so there are tools that we can put into place, due diligence questions to ask, and background questions to ask of potential projects. There are always positives and negatives of asking those types of questions though, right? Because if we want to be flexible and open for people that are coming from all racial backgrounds, we want to be really conscious of not putting undue pressure on folks and what their backgrounds might be, at the same time as teasing out folks that may not be coming to fiscal sponsorship from the purest of perspectives. At Side Project, we do that in a couple of different ways. All potential projects are required to have a phone or video conversation with our team before they're invited to do an application. We do basic Google background. We do ask folks a little bit if they've had any fraud charges, because we have to know that as a nonprofit organization. And so we do ask some about what their background is in that regard. We want to make sure that people are serving the community that they are part of, so that they're not some outside group coming in and saying that they're going to change something in the community that they're not part of that community. And so that's really important for us. So we do employ some due diligence methods to make sure that we're not getting folks coming in that are trying to get fiscal sponsorship for other alternate means than the mission that they're presenting. And that's what we have found from the presentation that we got, that white supremacist groups are trying to do. And so there's a way to combat that within fiscal sponsorship. in that way. What other questions are there that folks have?
I had a question.
Hi.
My background is in, my research background's in ABCD and grant writing. So I wasn't as familiar with the term fiscal sponsorship, but I feel like it kind of, you could group it. I mean, if I'm thinking about funders, funding agencies, maybe it kind of falls in the same categories. And I'm really interested in what you're hearing or what you're learning from different fiscal sponsors about alternative application processes. And thinking about, I work at a community college. We have PhDs sitting all over the place. I have 3 or 4 that review our grant applications before they're ever submitted. But, the research I was doing, working with these, learning the processes for applications from grassroots, nonprofits, grassroots organizations, they have great ideas. They have a great track record, but maybe they don't have a handful of PhDs reviewing their applications. So they're at a disadvantage, or maybe they're not native English speakers, so they're at a disadvantage. So I've talked to some funders about really looking at their application processes. Would they consider an oral presentation? Would they consider, different kinds of applications? I don't know what to go beyond that, but I'm really interested if you all are learning about different alternative application processes that don't disadvantage small grassroots organizations.
Yeah, I think you're really hitting it right there with making sure that you're giving opportunities to be flexible and to meet people where they're at. Dara talked about that a little bit when, and we can send you the information if you give us your information and you're willing. We can send you some of the background research that we've done specifically with TSNE Mission Works. They've done a lot around this topic about flexibility and accessibility. And so exactly right, the opportunity for oral presentations. The project that Dara mentioned, Rochelle Jackson, who is a Black woman leading the Black Women's Policy Agenda project, she was able to give oral presentations for 2 of her major funding grants that she received from major institutions in Pittsburgh. And so they did give her the opportunity to have that sort of flexible reporting requirements. And I think in this sort of interim, right, so we know that there are systemic issues in place that may prevent non-native English speakers, people of color, people that aren't PhDs, people that aren't in the nonprofit sector or have backgrounds in grant writing, to prevent them from gaining access to a lot of funding sources. And so before we get to the point where we have opened that up, we can partner with fiscal sponsorship on this path. And we were just talking while you were all in your breakout sessions, we were talking a little bit. And one of the things that I said was the perfect world would be if fiscal sponsorship was no longer needed, because funders would just fund charitable projects because they're doing the work that they're doing and not having the IRS tax deductible requirements. But until we're at that place, we can partner with fiscal sponsorships and have funders get to know the fiscal sponsorships in their area, the fiscal sponsor organizations in their area, so that if they get an incredible project that comes across their desk that doesn't have their 501c3 or may not have the internal capacity, they can partner with someone that does that specific work. And that's what we do at Side Project, is we really work alongside our projects so that we can teach them and equip them what they need to know so that they can then grow into be their own organization, in many cases, and not every case, but in many cases, so that they can do the work on their own. And so it should be a true partnership. But yeah, exactly what you said, Angela, flexible reporting requirements, oral presentations, having folks bring information that isn't for applications, that isn't the standard, like type all of the things out, and having that be open. And there are organizations that are discussing this already. What our goal is to bring these conversations along, and so let's hopefully formalize this and let more people know that this is a tool that we can use.
Yeah, you guys are doing important work. Thank you for sharing all of this.
Yeah. What other questions do folks have? Or thoughts? If you don't have a question and you just want to say, fiscal sponsorship is great, or or something else, let us know.
I guess there's an organization that I'm with, Wichita Independent Neighborhoods, that does do sponsorship, and this is going to be useful. I'm looking forward to reading the paper and any other studies that you guys have come across to kind of help me do that. But I want to reach out and encourage people to consider that we have four currencies as human beings. Though we have the government-backed securities, they do one thing, they're very important at certain times, indispensable, but we also have time, energy, and attention, and we can invest those and we can hoard those. We can give them begrudgingly or we can give them enthusiastically. And for me personally, I really listen to myself of what's going through my head when I'm thinking about going into a neighborhood or going to meet a person who doesn't look like me. What's happening internally? Is there inherited biases? I am the child of colonizers. I mean, that's a reality. And so I know that the roots of that are still within me. They still manifest in things that I may not even recognize. So by thinking of time, energy, and attention as being the primary means of community engagement, it really helps kind of bring it home, if you will, and helps me become what I think of as a better person or a more loving and supportive person of multiple communities in my neighborhoods.
Thank you for sharing that. I love that. So I know you've heard Dara and I talk. I don't want to put you on the spot, but I want to know if you want to share anything about your perspective as a sponsored project.
Yeah, you were reading my mind there. I was getting ready to say something. So, hello, everyone. I am Ples Jones. I work with Arwen and Dara, and it's been a wonderful journey because the thought literally was just in my head at one moment, and they have helped me put it to paper and put it into a logic model that actually is becoming a reality. I think anyone, and this obviously is just my opinion, but having the benefits of a fiscal sponsorship where you don't have to worry about the 501c and all the other administration, and you can focus on your project. Because as we all know, those who are doing nonprofits, it's more than a full-time job because you're creating and you're thinking of ideas and you're working it. So the administrative side is already being taken care of. All you have to do is get that project to reality and start the funding and get it out there for people to for it to benefit the community. So, and they have been really, really helpful. As she said, the meetings have been really fantastic, encouraging. Arwen has made me think much deeper than I ever thought I could on this project. And a lot of times it was just, I'm sitting there like, man, how am I going to do this? But then it clicks and it's like, okay, this is why she did this. So again, I encourage anyone who is thinking about a fiscal or siding with one or joining one would definitely do it because it's been fun. It's been, mind draining at times, but this is something that I want to do for everyone. In my area, in the Pittsburgh area, as far as helping, chemotherapy patients. So I definitely want it to be this reality. And, I couldn't think of a better way of helping me do that without, worrying about, again, those administrative sides and everything. So.
Thanks, Ples. I do want to just note for a second, I didn't say it during the side project portion of the background, but the reason that we're named side project and our sort of tagline is, what's your charitable side project? Because the folks that we work with have full-time jobs, mostly, that aren't doing the work that they're doing, this grassroots community organizing work that they're doing. They're doing something else, and then they want to do this change. They want to create this change in their community. So for us at Side Project, it's really helping folks that that are coming to this because they see a need and they want to address the need, or they see an opportunity and they want to fill that opportunity. And so so folks like Plus who are doing other work and they have experienced something and they want to change the situation that they're in, we're hoping to help those folks. So that's Side Project's name and sort of a little bit more about our background. So I think I'll open it up to see if there are any other comments and questions. And I just want to thank you all for taking the time to join us. Again, if you haven't put your information and you want to get the paper, you can drop that on the shared slide deck. We can link that again in the chat. Maybe Kim, if you can link it for me one more time in the chat. And we're not going to contact you for other things, but we'll email you the paper when it's done, which will be by August, because that's when Dara is leaving her placement at Side Project. So we have a deadline. Thanks, everyone. I think if there's nothing else, we should be good for the day. I think if you're on the East Coast, have a great afternoon. If you're on the West Coast, we have the whole rest of our day. So enjoy the sun.